Good morning, Dawg Nation. I'm Brandon Adams, and this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented today by ServPro. By the way, fun announcement coming up with our friends at ServPro here in a few minutes. Also, great day for you to be with us because football is back. Spring practice begins for Georgia today. That means hearing from Kirby Smart, hearing from some Georgia players, and getting all kinds of rumors, whispers, and reports about the things that are happening on that practice field for the Dogs as they get ready for the 2025 season. We are so excited about all of that and can't wait to talk to you about this here right now. The season's going to be here before you know it, but in so many ways, as far as we're concerned, it actually begins today as the real work on the practice field gets rolling. So what do you say we talk about that? We've got predictions here about some of the stuff we might hear from Kirby Smart today using the past as our guide on that. I think you'll like this. In fact, let's go ahead and get ready to get it started. It is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented today by ServPro. And it begins right now.
Today's episode of DawgNation Daily is brought to you by ServPro. Cleaning, restoration, construction.
Presented by DawgNation.com. This is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. Here's your host, Brandon Adams.
Oh, boy, do we love this day. The start of Georgia's spring practice. Can't wait for all of the whispers and the rumors and the did you hear about so-and-so. There's going to be a lot of that in the time to come from the people who know somebody who knows somebody who knows somebody. We'll get some official DawgNation practice reports throughout this time here, too. That'll be kind of real and on the record. And today, speaking of on the record, we're going to get a chance to hear from Georgia coach Kirby Smart. We have not heard Kirby speak, at least publicly, since the Sugar Bowl in New Orleans. So there'll be a lot that comes out of this here today. In fact, for a few minutes, before we kind of give way to two great guests, Jake Fromm later, Connor Riley in a couple of minutes, before we get into that, I want to give you a few predictions as what I think we might hear from Kirby Smart as we kind of unofficially kick off 2025. In so many ways, for me, the football season kind of never ends, of course, but it really begins when practice begins. And today's the day in which that happens, and Kirby Smart speaks to kick all of this off. I want to give you a few predictions as to what I think we might hear. And what I'm going to use as my guide for this is, I went back this morning, and I did a little bit of this last night this morning. I was looking at Kirby Smart's introductory press conference to begin last spring. And one of the good things we do at DawgNation.com, Connor Riley typically does this. It's kind of a transcript. You know, we'll publish the Kirby Smart press conference. You can watch it on video. But if you also want to read completely unedited, fully just out there questions and answers, if you want to see that, we typically put that up at DawgNation.com. So I was watching the video and kind of looking at the transcript and kind of looking, okay, because when you think about it, so much happens over the course of a college football calendar year or, you know, from a last March to this March, so much happens over the course of that time. It's almost like a year ago seems like 1,000 years ago just because of everything that transpires. Part of the time we get there on that, there's just a lot that kind of goes down. And so I was trying to put myself in the position of, okay, well, how did we feel in March of 2024 when that season was just starting, when that spring practice was fresh and new? How did we feel at the time for that? And what did those feelings and the words used by Kirby Smart at that time, what kind of indication does that give us about how things might play out for Georgia here today as well? And one of the things that we did, this is my first prediction, one of the things that we did get a lot of last year, my guess is we get once again. You know, last year when Kirby spoke to the media for the very first time, he started with a pretty lengthy injury update. Georgia almost always has like the labrum surgeries and the guys recovering from injury. It's not uncommon for Georgia players, even guys who go on to win like national awards, have great seasons. It's not uncommon for them to either be limited or unavailable during spring practice. So there's typically a long list of injuries. And last year, Kirby Smart, and you can go see this at the DawgNation YouTube page. You can read this at DawgNation.com. Last year to begin spring practice, Kirby kind of rattled off every one of these injuries, I thought, in pretty specific detail. Now, normally in the course of a season, Kirby's not always that forthcoming about injuries. I think in the case of the introductory spring practice press conference, to be frank, it's just a good way to run out the clock. If you spend more time talking at the beginning, that's less questions you have to answer at the end. And so that's probably Kirby Smart's strategy on that. We also got the surprise of Pierce Sperlin being medically disqualified last year, taking that medical retirement Sperlin did. So be on guard. Not so quite as severe as that, but perhaps in addition to updates on Branson and Roderick Robinson and Monroe Freeling and Gabe Harris and the other injured guys that we sort of know about, perhaps be on guard for a little bit of a surprise when it comes from Kirby on that. But for those of you who've been wondering about some of these injuries, how healthy is Georgia, guys coming back from some of this kind of stuff, guys going through some of this kind of stuff, right off the top today, my guess is that we get a pretty detailed injury report from Kirby Smart, because that's basically exactly what we got a year ago. And then my next prediction is, once again, using last year's introductory press conference as our guide here, the first question out of the box, basically the first question out of the box, was about Georgia a year ago having 4 new assistant coaches. That was what? T-Rob and Dante Williams and Crawford, the running backs coach, and James Coley coming back to coach the wide receivers. 4 new coaches, getting them onboarded, getting them acclimated. That was one of the things that Kirby kind of talked about right out of the gate a year ago. This year, and I would imagine this may be the very first question. Whoever asked it, media person, doesn't matter probably, but almost the very first question out of the box you've got to imagine is going to be, much like a year ago, it's, hey, tell us about these 4 new coaches and what that process is like. It's, talk to us about the fact that everybody did come back. Georgia's bringing back, I think, for the first time in a while, if not ever, under Kirby Smart, they're bringing back every coach from the previous year. All 10 coaches, they're all returning. It is complete and total continuity when it comes to coaching staff. On the one hand, that's a good thing because you're just sort of hitting the ground running during the spring. But on the other hand, you perhaps have noticed there's a lot of chatter about the fact that not every fan, as you know, is thrilled about this decision. My guess is that's also, like, right out of the gate, something that Kirby is asked about. We said this on Friday's show, that our hope is if Smart does discuss these things, that he'll match the candor that we got from some of the Georgia players at the NFL Scouting Combine about the fact that the Georgia offense just wasn't what it needed to be. To keep the same conversation going, much the same way that Kirby's going to be asked about bringing back all of his coaches, my next prediction is that he will be asked in even greater detail about the nature of the Georgia offense and kind of where it needs to be better. In fact, I want to show you this on the screen for a moment to kind of give you an idea of just how true this is. So the other day at ESPN.com, they were looking, and they did this for all the power conferences, they were looking at a spring preview for each of those teams. And Mark Schleybaugh wrote the person for Georgia and the portion, I should say, for Georgia. And each of these teams got a write-up based on their top spring storyline, the position of intrigue, and the player to watch. And when you look at what Schleybaugh, who I think of is pretty plugged in, especially when it comes to Georgia, when you look at what Schleybaugh writes here, all of this is related to shortcomings on offense. Spring storyline, he says at ESPN.com. Much of the focus is going to be on its offense, which struggled to catch the ball and run it when it mattered in 2024. Schleybaug's position of intrigue, he writes, Georgia's offensive line was expected to be one of the best units in FBS in 2024, but it struggled to create holes in the running game and protect the quarterback. And then when it comes to the player to watch, he references wide receivers by saying no position on the team was criticized more in 2024 than Georgia's receivers. So here it is, Schleybaugh writing for a national audience at ESPN.com, 3 bullet points about Georgia. Receivers were criticized, offensive line struggled, and the offense was worse than it had been for Georgia in a good number of years. This has now gone mainstream. Concerns about the Georgia offense is not just a niche belief and conversation talking point amongst a very deeply invested group of Georgia fans. Now the broad-based, kind of wide-minded ESPN.com writing for national fans here who are nowhere near as plugged in as all of you are. They're now aware of all these things too. It is a big enough talking point that it will probably need to be, and I would predict will be addressed in pretty significant detail, the fact that Georgia's offense, in plain language, just wasn't good enough a year ago. The stuff that Schleybaugh wrote, I'm guessing, will be kind of the formulation for some of the questions that we'll hear a little bit later on today. Now, for a fourth prediction, there'll be this, that we will get into greater detail about what's going on for Georgia at the quarterback position. And as a way of kind of setting this up, I want to provide a little bit of a contrast for a moment. We're going to hear, I'm guessing, a lot about Gunnar Stockton today and some about Ryan Puglisi probably too. And in terms of what we might hear, I want you to hear, and I don't play this to like throw dirt or like, I mean, at this point in time, the Carson Beck era is in the past. I'm ready to move on from it. I'm guessing and I believe that you probably do too. But my point is, I want to listen for a moment about what Kirby said about Beck this time a year ago, and in contrast, what Kirby, I believe, will say about his presumed starter for this year, Gunnar Stockton, today. So let's hear this first, make a contrast after that. This is almost exactly a year ago, Kirby Smart talking about his then starting quarterback, Carson Beck.
Yeah, I don't. Carson is not an extremely assertive young man. That's not his. He doesn't try to assert himself mechanically. He doesn't just jump in there and do it. I think he's done that more in the last couple of days since being back from spring break, and I expect to see it even more today in terms of leadership in the huddle and the things he does. But he has high standards. He has high expectations. His decision to come back was built around doing something different, doing something special. I think he's got to build a rapport with some of these new wideouts we've got. We've got several new wideouts in that room that are going to be important for him to grow with. But I'm very comfortable with where he is as a leader, and the way he leads is the way he's comfortable leading, which is primarily through his actions.
So that is Kirby a year ago on Carson Beck. Once again, I'm not interested in relitigating the Beck era at Georgia, only to say that when Kirby says, well, our quarterback's not particularly assertive, that's what he said a year ago. I don't believe that's what he'll say about Gunnar Stockton here today. The sense that we get from talking to people in and around Gunnar's first start in New Orleans at the Sugar Bowl at the beginning of the year is that being assertive, being in command, being in control, being the focal point from a vocal standpoint, we believe is not a problem for Gunnar Stockton. And when Kirby says at the end of that clip there that, Carson Beck is now going to have to work to establish a rapport with the new receivers who are coming in, there's a degree to which that Gunnar Stockton's going to have to do the same thing. But once again, when it comes to the stuff that Gunnar will do well, our assumption is, once again, based on people who either know Gunnar personally or know this situation closer to it more so than we are, is that particular aspect of being a quarterback for Gunnar Stockton is one of the things that will probably come natural to him. The one thing that you are overwhelmingly confronted with as you watch Gunnar play second half against Texas in the SEC championship and in that college football playoff loss for Georgia to Notre Dame is that players like playing with and playing for their quarterback, Gunnar Stockton, that command and assertion and just comfort in the leadership role, including vocally, that's one of the things that Gunnar Stockton will probably do well. And my guess is we will hear Kirby Smart today say that out loud. And if you go back and play whatever Kirby says about Gunnar compared to what he said about Carson Beck a year ago, I do believe you will notice a sharp contrast. Doesn't guarantee that Gunnar Stockton is going to be the greatest quarterback of all time. And it doesn't mean that Carson Beck was the worst quarterback of all time. We've said before, we don't have a problem giving Carson credit for some of the things he did provide to Georgia while he was here. But I do believe you will hear a contrast today in terms of how Kirby speaks about Gunnar and how he spoke about Carson Beck a year ago. However, I think you'll also see another contrast going in the opposite direction. Because here's the one thing you have to be really, really honest about for right now. I believe that Gunnar is going to have a remarkable strength when it comes to the leadership part of being a quarterback, the intangible part of being a quarterback, the contribution to team chemistry part of being a quarterback, the cultivation of connection, some of the stuff that's mattered for Georgia before. I believe that Georgia's going to be in really good hands when it comes to Carson Beck and all of that kind of stuff. I believe that Georgia's going to be really happy to have him as its starting quarterback in that particular regard. But a year ago at this time, Georgia had a full season returning starting quarterback who had a very good year in 23. Good enough that at least considering going to the NFL draft was a legitimate option. And instead, Beck came back to Georgia. We believe it was for a very large payday, but nonetheless, he returned to Georgia as a returning starting quarterback. Obviously, right now, Georgia does not have anywhere near that level of experience with its presumed starting quarterback. Stockton has played some, but of course, nowhere near as much as Beck had played a year ago. Furthermore, you look at the backup situation right now in Ryan Puglisi, he's played even less. And when you make a comparison between Georgia, and this is where you got to be honest here for a moment, when you make a comparison between Georgia and some of the other teams that it's competing with, right here in the SEC in particular, for instance, one of the things you see is that Georgia just has way less experience, way less quarterback depth than some of these other programs have. It doesn't mean that Gunnar Stockton can't be a great quarterback now. It doesn't mean that Ryan Puglisi can't be a great quarterback eventually. Perhaps both those things end up being true. But compare that to, say, like LSU, where they have Garrett Nussmeier returning and like the former Mississippi State quarterback, Michael Van Buren, as a backup. Think about Auburn, where you got like Deuce Knight coming in, truly elite prospect from the class of 2025, and a guy like Jackson Arnold, who had been the Oklahoma starter. You can kind of go throughout this league and look at various places. Robbie Ashford's backing up Lenore Sellers now at South Carolina. You've got various places around this league where there is a lot of quarterback depth. Doesn't make the position overall better, but it does mean perhaps more depth. And that's one of the things I believe we'll also hear Kirby Smart talk about today too, is that you're comfortable with your leadership. You're glad that Stockton got some experience at the end of last season, and the vibes, frankly, just may be better than they were with Carson Beck. But you cannot ignore the fact that a lot of other teams that Georgia's competing with have a lot more either experience or established depth based on either credentials or experience, perhaps, than Georgia does. And that's one of those things I believe today that Kirby Smart will be honest about. Now, there is one more thing that I am pretty sure we're going to hear from Kirby Smart today. And I do believe this will be, in a roundabout way, the kind of thing that confronts Georgia fans with a choice to be made. What will Smart say? What's the choice for fans? We'll tell you here coming up. But first, let's take some time to introduce the show. My name's Brandon Adams, and this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented today by ServPro. We're glad to have you with us. Video live at 10 a.m. For most people, it's an on-demand video product after that. Either way, we're just glad you found a time and a moment that works for you, and the fact that you're tuning in to watch the show, especially on a day like this when we're getting rock and roll in spring practice. Just really, really, really appreciative to have you for all of that. Podcast, folks, great news. So far, so good on a little bit of tinkering under the hood with us. We've had issues with our Apple Podcast player. The early returns are that it's fixed, and I believe it's fixed forever. We have done a lot on this. Some of that required kind of going back. We're kind of an old podcast. We're, at this point in time, I think we kind of sort of a legacy podcast. It means much like an old building. Some of our plumbing and our pipes and our systems, some of that infrastructure is kind of old too. So we've kind of gone in there and upgraded a lot of that. And so that is a good situation. Of course, radio, Athens Sports Radio 96 The Ref. Glad to have you tuning in there too. Huge thanks to our friends at ServPro who make today's show possible. And speaking of ServPro, man, I love them for what they do for us. Restoration specialists, cleaning up big-time damage, fire, water intrusion, things like that. But I also want to make you aware of this. Our friends at ServPro don't just clean up messes. After all, you got to have a little fun in life. And coming up very soon, we're all going to get our chance to have some fun with our folks from ServPro when it comes to the brand new sports team in town here. How about the Athens Rock Lobsters? Have you heard of that? That's the new hockey team that plays in the arena there in downtown Athens. Well, guess what? Our friends at ServPro are going to be sponsoring a First Responders Appreciation Night coming up on Friday, March 28th. I'm going to be there for that. We want you to be there too. It's a great night of fun for the entire family, as ServPro is going to be honoring a lot of the first responders who are doing great things in our community. And nothing fills me with more pride than to see the police, the fire, the EMTs, the school resource officers, all the folks who are out there doing incredible stuff in our community. And our friends at ServPro want to pay honor and tribute to that. And our first responders can also get special discounted tickets, too. That's a great thing. We're going to have some DawgNation stuff to give away. As I said before, I'm going to be there at the Aikens Ford Arena. And there's going to be kind of when I had kids, I still have kids, but when they were very little kids, we used to do like the touch-a-truck things when they were young. There's going to be a little bit of a version of that outside the Aikens Ford Arena there that night, as the ServPro Mobile Command Center is going to be showing up and being a big part of that. You can find this online. I'm going to give you the website as I have it here. You may be better off just frankly searching this, Athens Rock Lobsters, ServPro. You also check out our show notes. We'll post the show at DawgNation.com. You can see that. The website you see on the screen, you can't click this, of course, but you can go to bit.ly/lobster cleanup. That's a bit.ly address. That works probably better if you're on mobile. But if you'll just search, Rock Lobsters First Responders Night, ServPro, you'll get right where you need to go. You can get the tickets there for that. It's going to be a great time. So I'll see you there coming up Friday, March 28th for a great time with the Athens Rock Lobsters there at the Aikens Ford Arena, and a big First Responders Appreciation Night, courtesy of our friends at ServPro. That makes sense? You got all that? Okay, good. All right. We got a great show for you. It's Jake Fromm later on. It's Connor Riley in a moment. Prior to that, though, let's go around the doghouse and let's keep the conversation going that we were just having, which is predictions for what I believe we'll hear from Kirby Smart. And I once again want to use last year as our guide, because in the final question that Kirby Smart was asked a year ago in his introductory press conference to kick off the 2024 spring practice, one of the things that came up was, hey, for the first time in a while, Georgia was beginning spring practice as not the reigning national champs. They had not won the national title, as you know, in 2023, now getting back to work in 2024, for the first time ever, not the defending national champions. And what Smart was asked was, what kind of vibe, what kind of energy does this give you for this year's spring practice, knowing you don't quite have that as your storyline anymore? And what Smart said to that specific question about those circumstances for a year ago, I also think has some carryover for today. So let's hear this from a year ago and talk about how this might be mirrored by what Smart also says today. Here is Kirby again.
Every year starts fresh. I say that all the time. Y'all say it's coach speaking redundant, but for me, it's a fresh beginning with a new team. And I'm trying to, since the last whistle, recreate this team. What does the 2024 team look like? And that would be the case regardless of how last year finished. I don't think that last year plays anything into this season. Each season is independent of the previous.
So Kirby Smart says every year's a new year. That means every year is a fresh start. I want to focus on that phrase just for a moment. And it leads, I think, to a question for Georgia fans. We know the team itself is looking for a fresh start. And if you've ever been a player on a team, I'm talking about at any level, I think you have a little bit of an understanding about this. Whereas, like, hey, some years things just don't quite go your way. Like, I mean, I wasn't close to an athlete the way that obviously these Georgia players are. I wouldn't even pretend to be. But I do sort of know what it feels like to, it's like, sometimes you sort of get in a rut, whether it be injury related or you're just not playing well or things are just not quite going the way you want them to go. Some years it's just kind of not your year. And when that happens, you are so ready for a new year. You're so ready for a fresh start. You're so ready for what you hope is a clean slate. And, sometimes new coaches provide that opportunity, but sometimes in this case, the same coaches can provide that fresh start, that clean slate for these particular players. And perhaps many of these guys are looking forward to get it. But how about those of us who are Georgia fans? And how about those of us who have been in kind of an ongoing discussion about lingering frustrations because of all the stuff that I mentioned a moment ago, the fact that the offense a year ago wasn't very good? My question for you, or at least not at a championship level, my question for you is, are you also willing to extend a fresh start to Georgia? The way that Kirby says, I'm here to give my team a fresh start, clean slate, let's start brand new. Are you willing to give that fresh start to Georgia yourself, or are you intent on carrying your same closely held opinions based on last year's narratives into this year? And listen, I'm not talking down at you. I'm not preaching at you. Even though I don't agree with some of your assessments of so-and-so should have been fired and this should have happened and that should have happened, obviously, if you've listened long enough, we're on a little bit of a different wavelength when it comes to some of that kind of stuff. I also have given platform for people to say what they want to say about that. And I don't fault you if you think the offense needs to be better and if you were a little frustrated by the fact that it wasn't maybe last year as good as you've come to expect for Georgia. I think we've been pretty generous with our willingness to hear points of view when it comes to that. But now it is really turning the page to the 2025 season. And I do believe we'll hear Kirby say something to the effect of fresh start here today. And my question is, are you also willing to extend that fresh start? I'm not here to tell you that you have to, but it might be a nice thing to do. And we'll see if Georgia fans are eager to do that. All right, good to have you with us. We love this day. Getting back to business here when it comes to football. The scene in Athens, can't wait to discuss it all. We'll do that with Jake Fromm a little bit later on. But how about for right now, a guy who's ready to write it all and give it to us. I love his practice reports. We'll get one of those later this week. I love all of that. Let's talk to Connor Riley here today, DawgNation Daily, presented by ServPro.
From Athens and across the SEC or wherever the recruiting trail may lead, here's a DawgNation.com insider.
Let's say hello to Connor Riley. Connor, I believe you like this day every bit as much as I do. Kicking off spring practice, hearing from Kirby Smart, have not heard from him in quite some time. I gave my predictions a moment ago, 5 of them, in fact, of what I think we'll hear from Kirby today. I won't go back through all of these with you, and it's okay if you repeat some of it right now. But what do you expect to hear from Kirby Smart when he speaks later on today? A couple of things that sort of stand out to you in particular.
Yeah, there's the spring traditions that we have, whether it be Kirby talking about injuries, guys who are going to be out this spring. I think we'll get some clarity on Colby Young and his status with the team, given that his legal status has now been resolved. Gunnar Stockton will be a popular topic of discussion, the quarterback battle at large, maybe some Ryan Puglisi intel. But I think as we sit here about an hour and a half from when Kirby's press conference begins, it's what he has to say about his coaching staff, and I think specifically what he has to say about Mike Bobo and Stacey Searles. For the first time in his coaching career, Kirby did not have to make any coaching changes on his coaching staff. He retains all 10 on-field assistants that he had from a season ago. And given the season that Georgia had on the offensive side of the ball, I think some people are surprised by that. I know a lot of people wanted to see Stacey Searles and Mike Bobo moved on from. And specifically with Mike Bobo, there's been a ton of fan chatter of media pundits weighing in on him and what his status is. And I wouldn't be surprised in the slightest if we see maybe a surly Kirby Smart address some of the ways that Mike Bobo has been talked about, Mike Bobo has been discussed this offseason. Because I certainly get and understand the frustration. And look, Mike Bobo, because of his tenure here at Georgia when Mark Richt was the head coach, it's always been a little bit of a loaded subject. But I do feel like, and the media absolutely played a part in this, I think it has ratcheted up to another level when Kirby was telling people during last season there was a talent issue with this Georgia team. They've gone out and tried to rectify that, especially at the wide receiver position. I'll be interested in seeing what Kirby has to say about that. But I think the big topic for today going into it is what Kirby Smart has to say about Mike Bobo, because as you point out, we haven't heard from Kirby in almost 2 months, and this is the longest we'll go all year without hearing from Kirby Smart in some form or fashion.
Yeah, I think that's all really interesting. The way that I sort of said this earlier is, fair or not, criticism of the Georgia offense has now gone mainstream. If Paul Feinbaum is talking about it, it's mainstream. Even if it's not as well informed as maybe it should be, it's still, this is now at the sort of mainstream level. You know, we kind of gave the caption from the ESPN Georgia Spring Preview, 3 bullet points, all 3 of those about offensive struggles for Georgia last year, that for people that live outside the bubble of DawgNation, we're getting to the point now where if they only know one thing about Georgia right now, it's that a perennial national championship contender comes into a 2025 season with major questions on offense. That's like the one sort of Senate summary that even like non-Georgia fans, just sort of generic national college football observers, that's sort of the thing they know about Georgia. That's why I think that stuff, whether Kirby gives full voice to it or not, I think that's the stuff that gets addressed almost like right out of the gate here today.
It's open season on the Georgia offense, especially with how last season ended for the Bulldogs. And look, I believe it's in 8 games they combined to score 36 first half points, and Georgia will be the first to tell you that it's not good enough. But you look at who Georgia ended the season against in those last 2 games, Texas and Notre Dame, 2 teams that were among the Final Four playing for the national championship. And then you add in on top of that, Carson Beck goes down in the first half of that Texas game, and you're inserting Gunnar Stockton into the limelight there. And so this is a huge spring, I think, for Gunnar. I think long-term that experience against Texas and Notre Dame is going to help him. But based on how last season ended, they only scored 10 points against Notre Dame, even though Gunnar Stockton actually ended up throwing for more yards against Notre Dame than any quarterback did in the college football playoff. And so, it's very interesting to me. We have quarterback questions, whereas this time a year ago, I think the big question about Georgia's quarterback was why did he have a Lamborghini? And that sort of persisted throughout the season, or why did he have a Lamborghini? Because Carson Beck no longer has it. And so this spring, it is a lot more, I think, people questioning the structure, the play design, the play calling. And I tend to trust Kirby Smart on this, and this was sort of my read on it. They just didn't have enough talent on the offensive side of the ball a year ago. I think injuries prevented them from finding their best 5 offensive linemen. And at wide receiver, look, the situation was what the situation was. That's why James Coley was brought in prior to last season to elevate the talent there at wide receiver. And so going into today, yes, there's going to be Gunnar Stockton questions, Mike Bobo questions. Where does he feel about the talent on this team, especially just given the turnover that we see year in, year out?
You mentioned Colby Young earlier. My guess is, the sense I've always gotten is that Colby Young is coming back. I don't know if it's like spoken in such explicit terms of, yes, Colby Young is now back as a full participant on this team. I don't know if it's going to be quite said so clearly, but my assumption is when you get a chance to see practice for the very first time, you'll see Colby out there practicing, and Colby Young is going to be a player in sort of normal standing with this team in 2025. Is that your expectation?
It is. They brought Colby back at the end of last season. He was practicing with the team in anticipation of that legal status getting resolved. That ultimately never happened. It ended up getting resolved at the end of January. You factor in the Diego Pavia news where all college football players, not necessarily all college athletes, if they have JUCO eligibility, that gets tacked back on there. I think Georgia wants to have as many big-bodied wide receivers on the outside there. And so I think for Georgia and what they're getting and what they'll have, look, you take as many Colby Youngs as you can have, because a year ago you saw just how quickly your wide receiver room can get thinned out. Like you, I expect Colby Young to be back and at practice when we get a chance to see that on Thursday. This is just something where you have to check the T or cross the T's, dot the I's, make sure that it's actually done. I don't think we're going to get some grand big statement on it. But given, say, the way the Trevor Etienne news happened earlier this year, where people erroneously reported that he was expected to be back and then ultimately he elects to go to the NFL draft, I think this is just one of the things where you have to make sure it is done and all squared away before then just assuming that he's going to be back there helping Georgia in 2025.
Last year, Kirby started with a long list of injuries. This year, Georgia has that too. That's not a concern. This is sort of typical for Georgia. Any chance we get a surprise sprinkled in on that? Or I guess in a sort of a short synopsis, what do you expect to hear? What I'm guessing will be the opening statement from Kirby about who is and isn't available here this spring.
I would be surprised if there isn't a surprise. That's just sort of what we, I think, know to expect now with these injuries. In Georgia, so much of it is cleanup and just getting guys set to where they can be ready to go for the start of fall camp. Some of the guys we know that are going to be out. Monroe Freeling, obviously limited with a shoulder injury. Kristen Miller, defensive lineman, also going to be limited with a shoulder injury there. Gabe Harris, who this is going to be a critical offseason for him with just where Georgia is at the outside linebacker position. I expect him to be limited during spring practice, as he's got a shoulder injury there as well. On the offensive side of the ball, running backs Branson Robinson and Roderick Robinson, I expect them to be limited because of injuries they suffered at the end of the 2025 season. Those are sort of the big names we know right now. And it wouldn't surprise me in the slightest if there was a name that hasn't been discussed yet or a contributor in that regard that is just using this spring to get fully healthy. And I know, injuries are never great. It's never something you want. Before Nakobe Dean won the Butkus Award in 2021 and before Brock Bowers won the Mackey Award in 2022, they both missed the spring prior. And I would point out there as well that Georgia went on to win a national championship in both of those seasons. I'm not going to say that Georgia's going to do that right now, but this spring and getting healthy for guys at certain spots, I think can be a lot more important than necessarily the reps that they could have potentially gotten for Georgia this spring.
Kirby will almost certainly be asked about the status of spring practice around college football. Georgia, I guess, remains committed to G-Day for this year. Do you think that we'll hear Kirby today sort of express a long-term commitment in spring practice, or do you think he'll have to pragmatically acknowledge that, well, if it's disappearing for everybody else, that it may eventually have to disappear for Georgia too?
I would lean towards the latter, if only because Josh Brooks, when he was asked about this a few weeks ago at an athletic board meeting, sort of did lean into the short-term side of things. But to your point on spring games and spring practice, I think Kirby has been a little reluctant to really use his voice as, I think right now, the preeminent coach in college football and weigh in on certain issues. And so I'll be interested in seeing what he has to say about spring football, because there are coaches out there with far lesser credentials that feel very comfortable speaking on this and speaking so matter-of-factly. Matt Rule of Nebraska comes to mind, and you and I think both feel very strongly about how Rule has been outspoken in some of these regards. Yeah. And so I'm interested in seeing what Kirby has to say on this. I know Dabo Swinney came out recently and spoke in favor of spring games and the traditions that come with that, and I was glad to see that. Yeah. And I wonder if we'll see Kirby do the exact same thing today.
Josh Heupel did too, and I said that I joked yesterday. It's the first time we ever said anything about Josh Heupel on the show, but we gave him credit for standing up for what we believe is right on that. So sometimes college football makes for strange bedfellows, but we'll be happy about both Heupel and Swinney on that. Let me give you a wild card for a second, because you mentioned issues. Issues typically come up in this sort of thing. I'd kind of like to hear Kirby Smart asked about the role of general managers in college football and kind of the future of Georgia and its kind of, I guess you call it like player personnel department. I know that's kind of in the weeds and probably not everybody cares about that, but I think that's really interesting. Most of the programs the last few weeks have added GMs, perhaps coincidentally or not, it's programs with somewhat shaky coaches. You're trying to put an infrastructure in place beyond the current coach, I believe. Do you think that it's time for Georgia publicly to start talking about the role of general manager, player personnel? Obviously, Alabama has one. Some SEC teams do. We haven't heard Kirby talk a lot about that sort of thing. Is today a day in which that might happen?
No, because I think there's a lot of other business to get to. I will note Kirby's been asked about the role of a general manager in the past. Georgia does have one in terms of title. That is Mark Robinson, coming over from Florida last year. Kirby was asked about it in a way that he sort of spoke about Will Muschamp last year. He sort of kept it very vague in terms of what all Robinson does and what that means for Georgia and how they intend to use him. They also have a director of player personnel, Will Myers, there as well for Georgia. So I don't expect Kirby to get asked about that today, but that might be something he speaks on this spring. But I will say, just in asking about him in the past, Kirby has kept that sort of information and some of the behind-the-scenes dealings with college football. He's kept that very close to the chest. Okay, so let me broaden it out then to kind of get ready to wrap up here in a minute. What else is on your mind about what might play out here today? I'm interested in seeing what he has to say about the transfers that they brought in, 6 in total. Obviously the 2 wide receivers, Noah Thomas and Zachariah Branch. I think those guys have a chance to be very, very good players for Georgia this year. And I'll see what he has to say about those safeties that they brought in, because obviously Kirby Smart works very heavily with the defensive backs there. They have to replace Malachi Starks. They have to replace Dan Jackson. They bring in 3 guys who all offer things a little different. Adrian Maddox has played a ton of football, but it's all been at the lower level coming over from UAB. Zion Branch has all the tools in the world, but he hasn't necessarily been able to stay healthy and get on the field. And then you have Jaden Harris, who's played at a big-time program at Miami, but I think wants to further develop as a player here. So what he has to say about the transfers and quite frankly as well, just as importantly, how Georgia was able to offset some of the losses that they had in the transfer portal. A year ago, they lose 21 players to the transfer portal. This year, they only lose 12. And so how does Kirby feel about how he did about retaining talent on this Georgia roster? Because at a place like Georgia, that's far more important than who they always bring in.
The other thing is, will he acknowledge that, like to the average viewer, myself included, Georgia seems really thin at outside linebacker, pretty thin at defensive end, at least in terms of established players, plenty of talent, but established players. Sometimes you wonder if Kirby is willing to give credence to what most of us would say is just sort of obviously true, or does he kind of take a different approach in how he speaks about that?
Right, and that might be something he addresses later on, especially as the portal window opens up in the middle of April 16th through April 25th. But it's a Georgia team, as talented as it is and as many guys as they've brought in, I think there are still some spots that they need to add at, potentially a veteran running back. Obviously, quarterback is something they've kicked the tires on, and then at outside linebacker as well. With Gabe Harris not out there, Quintavious Johnson is a guy you're going to hear a lot from this year. But other than that, you're playing three freshmen there. And Isaiah Gibson might be someone who plays more of that defensive end role than necessarily a pure outside linebacker. But you're going to need a lot from those guys quickly, and I'll be curious to see what they get from that outside linebacker room in particular this spring.
All right, Connor, can't wait to read it all from you there at DawgNation.com. We appreciate your coverage. We'll come back, talk more about all of this. It's going to be a fun few weeks. I really am excited about it. I love G-Day. Can't wait for it. Can't wait for you to see this team on the practice field. Give us some information on that. That'll come later this week. Thanks for your time. We'll talk to you soon here on DawgNation Daily, presented by ServPro.
Yep, as always, it's a pleasure.
Yes, sir.
Let's take a look around the rest of the league. This is SEC Through.
Yeah, man, great buzz, great energy when you're talking about this sort of stuff, and all of this goes down a little bit later on. We'll be hearing from some Georgia players today, too. I thought a couple of those choices in terms of who we'll be hearing from, I thought that was pretty telling, so we'll get to a lot of that coming up in the days ahead. Also, we're not done with great guests on today's show. It's Jake Fromm here coming up in just a couple of minutes. Prior to that, let's get ready to go cruise around the SEC, courtesy of Royal Caribbean. And boy, privately behind the scenes, I've said this before, when you get to this time of year, you start to sort of making those last-minute sort of preparations for your Royal Caribbean cruise. That means you go to the app, you get signed in, you get kind of registered, get your check-in time, you get all the stuff that's sort of the precursor to being on the ship, and we're excited about that. We've had a lot of meetings as of late, official, unofficial, just kind of, private chats about how it's all going to go down for us on Utopia of the Seas here coming up really now in just a few weeks. And to me, the build up to the cruise, whether it's a DawgNation cruise or just a Royal Caribbean cruise you're taking with the folks that you love in your life, it's the build up to the cruise that's so much fun. I love the prepping and the planning. I love to go online and watch the YouTube videos. I love to investigate all the various deck plans and the neighborhoods and the specialty restaurants. Like, I'm one of those guys that wants to know everything about the ship before I get on board. I just want to, make my plans, my itinerary. Now, I can deviate from it while I'm on the ship, but I just want to have, I just love that. To me, it's the excitement of getting ready for it. It's about as much fun as anything. We are very much in that phase right now when it comes to our DawgNation cruise. So if you want to have that same feeling in your life, reach out to our friend Jessica Slater. Now, the reason why I always recommend Jessica is because our friends from Royal Caribbean believe that a great Royal Caribbean cruise vacation is made even better when you use a wonderful travel agent like Jessica to help you plan it. So give her a call, 770-718-9147. That's 770-718-9147. You can also email her, jslater@dreamvacations.com. That's going to be a great time. Anything you do with Royal Caribbean here in 2025 is going to be great for you. All right, we got Jake Fromm here in a moment. Let's go cruise around the SEC. Prior to that, let me begin with this recruiting note. Jared Curtis, the five-star quarterback who will be visiting Georgia in a few days as a precursor to that, taking his visit to Oregon here right now. I'll show you this on the screen here for a moment. Matt Prem writing, the number 2 player in the 24/7 Sports composite, the five-star quarterback Jared Curtis is on his unofficial visit to Oregon today. Took a campus tour with his parents and Oregon staffers. Going to be in Eugene this week. So up above, you see Matt's picture of Curtis and the Oregon folks there on campus. And on the left there, you see a photo from Curtis's Instagram, which he calls Eugene, Oregon, but it's like the coast. And listen, I don't know that I was getting an A in geography, but the last time I checked, I don't believe Eugene is on the coast. I guess we're what? You got to be at least an hour or two from Eugene to get to the ocean, right? Perhaps I'm wrong about that, but it seems like that's the case. At first, I sort of thought this was, you ever see that little meme template that exists where like people be showing like a picturesque scene from like Europe or somewhere like that? They'll be like, oh, Lake Lanier is beautiful this time of year. I thought that's what this was at first when it comes to a Eugene, Oregon, but apparently while visiting Oregon, they kind of get out there to the coast, and there's obviously a pretty part of that there in Oregon. Think about like Bandon Dunes, people go play golf, stuff like that. So there's some pretty coastline there in Oregon. I never really thought of Eugene as that place, but nonetheless, Curtis seems to be having himself a nice visit. It's worth noting, as Prem, the Oregon writer, reports, Curtis is on his way to Georgia next. We've obviously talked a lot about that Curtis-Georgia connection. It's also fair to point out, though, that over the course of the last few days, you can read a lot from Jeff Sintel about this at DawgNation.com, that while Georgia's preparing to host Curtis, Georgia's also involved with other quarterbacks, too. It's extending offers. It's kicking the tires on others. I believe it has hosted the Oklahoma quarterback commit here this week. I think that's right. Read more about that at DawgNation.com. There's still a lot going on for Georgia at quarterback other than just Curtis. I don't know, and I think that people smarter than me would probably confirm this. I don't know that means that they don't like their chances with Jared, or they've kind of, given up on Jared or anything like that, or they like another quarterback better than Curtis. I don't think that's the case here. I think it's just an example of the fact that, hey, you can't put all your eggs in one basket. You got to have, other options available. And it seems like Georgia's pursuing some of that kind of stuff. I'll also briefly mention this week with the SEC basketball tournament getting going. And listen, I think this is going to be, it's fairly meaningless in terms of who actually wins it, because there's very little correlation between that and the actual March Madness. But when the overall depth of the league is on display, Nashville's, I think, a great venue for this. I think it's going to be really, really fun. I would almost say lob off Auburn, Alabama, Florida, probably Tennessee. Lob those top four teams off and assume the winner is not one of those top four, because that's sometimes the way that it goes. And then start looking at that next group of probably a Kentucky and Ole Miss and A&M. Maybe Georgia sneaks in there, but it could be a pretty wild week. I have my eye on Tennessee just a little bit. For reasons I'll get into a little bit later on. But should be a fun week with the SEC tournament. And, of course, March Madness Selection Sunday coming up on Sunday. So check out all of that. All right, now let's get ready to transition. Get ready for a Kroger Fresh Take as we bring in Jake Fromm here today. Of course, Georgia getting going for spring practice. Jake knows what that feels like, and we're happy to have him here today as part of a Kroger Fresh Take here on DawgNation Daily. Jake, before we get into the football stuff, are you a basketball fan at all? I don't think we've ever really talked about that. Do you follow March Madness? You filling out brackets? You doing that kind of thing?
A little bit of yes, a little bit of no. I mean, I'll follow it once it kind of gets later on in the tournament. But, yeah, I don't know. I've never been a crazy basketball fan. Springtime for me is a lot of turkey hunting.
Sure.
Spend a lot of time in the woods. So, yeah, basketball takes a lot lesser order of priority. Turkey hunting and golf is pretty much up there. Around this time of year, golf's getting fired up. Ready to watch my guy Scotty Shelfer win some tournaments. So.
I like that. How is your golf game these days? Because listen, if you're the quarterback, and this is one of the things I've noticed, because I've known a lot of quarterbacks throughout the years, there's a certain expectation for your golf game where it's like you're doing a lot of celebrity events, you're doing a lot of stuff for charity. Like there's just, if you're a quarterback, a lot of opportunity to play golf, which is a good thing. But there's also an expectation where the quarterback's got to be pretty good at golf. How is the golf game these days?
Well, I don't know if you've seen that clip of Scotty Scheffler talking about his buddy who is not a very good golfer, 10 handicap. I'm slightly less than that, probably around a 7 or an 8. So I'm decent on the golf course, but got a lot of room for improvement. So I'm okay. I could hit some good shots, but boy, I could have some bad rounds here in a heartbeat.
Of course, Russell Henley, Dawg on tour, won the Arnold Palmer Invitational on Sunday. When you were at Georgia or in your post career, have you met any of those guys? Henley, Kisner, have you met any of those guys?
Kisner, I have, man. Kisner came by and spoke to us.
Okay.
The football team there when I was there. Man, Kiss is a great dude. And it's fun, obviously, watching his career, and then now working on, kind of broadcasting, announcing, and being an analyst there. So it's pretty cool to keep up with.
No, that's great to see. Obviously, Georgia well represented when it comes to that. So spring practice begins today. And I think for fans, there's a fresh energy about all of that. It's just kind of fun to, even if you're not at practice, it's sort of fun to know that practice is taking place. We'll obviously hear from Kirby Smart today. But from a player perspective, how much fresh energy was there for you around this? On the one hand, it's going to be better than off-season workouts. But on the other hand, it's not quite like the same thing as fall camp. So what is the vibe like internally for a player in terms of body clock, things like that, when it comes to a spring practice as opposed to what happens when you get to true hardcore fall camp?
Yeah, so I think it's exciting for anybody when there's a ball in play and a ball's getting snapped. Football is kind of back. It just makes it so much more fun as a player to actually do the thing that you're there to do, right? So I would say for the younger guys, man, it's super exciting, super fun. Probably for the older guys, maybe not quite as exciting. Probably a little more, kind of gruesome of just, hey, I have to go through this. But, man, it's really fun. I promise the older guys are happy that they are done with the winter workouts and winter conditioning program, the dog time that Coach Sinclair puts those guys through. Man, that is just is a very tough and grueling just part of their workout kind of system and regimen. So they're excited to be done with that. Definitely excited to be on the grass and play some ball.
We talked about quarterbacks a little earlier. On the one hand, I mean, everything we've gotten from people talking about Gunner is well liked by his teammates, really ready to play for him. We believe that was true in certainly the 6 quarters we saw from him, SEC championship, college football playoff. So that's a really good thing. And yet, to be honest, when you compare Georgia to other teams it's competing with, no disrespect to Ryan Puglisi or Gunner, either one, but, Georgia has less sort of established depth at quarterback right now than almost any of the other kind of top teams right now. So I wanted to address that with you. Starting with Gunner Stockton. So he's played some. I think he played well. But what does he need to do now to build off that going into what we assume will be his first year as Georgia's starting quarterback for the full season?
Yeah, I think just his presence of taking ownership of the team, of the offense, man, it's just a different kind of feeling on your shoulders walking out there on that field and saying, hey, I'm the guy right now. Everybody's looking at me to make a play. I am setting the standard of how this offense is going to run and how this team is going to run. So I'm really excited for Gunner to kind of take on that role and that ownership this spring. It's a big opportunity for him. I think spring ball in general for all the quarterbacks is a huge opportunity. It's an opportunity for more reps. And Kirby really puts those guys through the ringer. So, man, really excited to kind of hear the buzz of what's coming out of spring practice, and really happy for Gunner to take on this opportunity.
And when it comes to Ryan Puglisi, people see the videos, and I see them too, and I always joke that if you're casting a quarterback in a movie, like, of course, Ryan Puglisi, he just looks like it. Nice body frame, throws it well, seems to throw on the run pretty well, that everything you want to see a quarterback doing when you watch Puglisi, he just sort of looks like a quarterback while he's doing it. And yet this is also a guy that's really not played. And I think that sometimes, we have a tendency to discount the value of experience when you don't have any of it. And so for Puglisi, I think the hope is, could he work his way into a situation where Georgia, if they had to play him because Gunner's helmet comes off or is he's dinged up or something like that, that you would feel okay about putting Puglisi in the game? I don't think he's quite there yet. I don't think that while he looks like a quarterback, he just doesn't quite have that experience. How does he ready himself so that Georgia would feel more okay about playing him, or perhaps readying himself so that he can make this a legitimate competition come fall? What do you think's next for Ryan Puglisi?
Yeah, it's just learning the playbook. It's about going out there and kind of demonstrating to the coaches that, hey, I understand the intent of this play. I understand versus this coverage, the ball's supposed to go here. I understand the playbook of what you as the coaches are trying to do on every given play. He's got to earn the trust of the coaches kind of through that, and really kind of display and be consistent throughout these practices. That's the only thing that kind of really scares coaches, especially at the quarterback position, is, the very good days and the really bad days. From especially the quarterback position, coaches are looking for consistency, and they want a guy they can trust back there in the helm.
I want to finish up by asking you more about that. Let me remind folks, it's our Kroger Fresh Take here today on DawgNation Daily with Jake Fromm. We love his insight into what it means to go through spring practice, especially for these quarterbacks, because obviously that's an experience that he's gotten and knows so well. And if you want to gain your own experience when it comes to something that's going to be important for you, how about get the experience of trying Kroger Boost for free right now for 30 days? That's the membership opportunity for Kroger that gives you a chance to take advantage of free grocery pickup, free grocery delivery, that gives you back more time in your life. Who doesn't want more of that? And how about the stuff that you're already buying at Kroger? You know, normally you get a fuel point for every dollar spent, but as a Kroger Boost member, you get twice the fuel points for every one of those dollars you're spending there at your local Kroger. So as you're stocking up on the food for your family and all that kind of stuff, how about saving some money at the pump along with it? That's what Kroger Boost gives you a chance to do. So go to Kroger.com/boost for more on that. That's Kroger.com/boost for more on that today. So, Jake, when we look at your career, I think anybody would say, especially those who scouted you, that you were probably considered an elite processor when it came to knowing the field, knowing the offense, reading the field, knowing your options. How hard is that part? Because I think for a lot of us, we sort of understand, well, the physical challenge of playing quarterback is immense, but when it comes to actually just knowing all the stuff you're supposed to know and being able to speak it out loud and explain it and lead when it comes to knowledge of the offense, how tough is that part of it? That's what obviously Ryan Puglisi is experiencing right now, because he has obviously been at Georgia for a lot shorter duration of time than Gunnar Stockton has been.
Yeah, I mean, for me, I think those two things are very not necessarily different, but I'm saying they're in two different buckets. Like, I think there's one thing of knowing it, and there's another thing of knowing it and processing it on the grass. So anybody can kind of get in the room and do some chalk talk, do some board talk, and kind of go through it and know where it's supposed to go. Man, it is a whole nother beast and a whole nother animal getting out there on the field, ball in your hands, 11 on 11, and being to process things very quickly, go through progressions, and find out where that ball is supposed to go on every given play. So that's kind of the disconnect. It really kind of hangs up a lot of quarterbacks here. And it's just trying to get these two things to coincide and connect. And I mean, that's what makes the best quarterbacks, of knowing where to go and then also being able to make it happen. So, man, for Puglisi, it's just, I think it's reps. I think it's a lot of visualization of seeing it in his head, kind of going through progressions, getting his mind, his feet, and his body ready to make these plays, and for Gunnar as well. So I think that's the biggest growth that we want to see. I think as fans, as anybody wants to see these quarterbacks say, hey, let's go out and let's process stuff very quickly. Let's get through our progressions and let's demonstrate an understanding of the offense.
Very quickly, you might not even know this, but your team, the Detroit Lions, you only get 30 pre-draft visits, and there was a report out of Detroit the other day that they're using one of theirs. They invited Chaz Chambliss to come up to Detroit. Now, Chaz didn't get invited to the Combine, but the Lions want to bring him in. Now, who knows what ends up happening in terms of a draft pick or a post-draft signing or something like that. That's obviously kind of up for grabs. But if there was ever a Dan Campbell player, Chaz Chambliss from Georgia sort of feels like that guy, right?
No doubt about that. Actually, I saw Chaz yesterday in the facility, and first thing I said to him was, man, I hate that you didn't get invited to the Combine. You deserved it. And then the next thing he said, well, hey, it's all right. I've been doubted my whole life. And hey, also I was actually in Detroit on a top 30 visit. So
that's awesome.
How about that? That's huge news for him. I think he's a great football player, great dude, and a great teammate, man. I'd love to obviously be teammates with him here in the league.
That's awesome, Jay. Great stuff. Thanks for telling that story. Great to speak to you. We'll look forward to doing it again. Enjoy your week. We'll talk to you soon.
Yeah, thank you, Brandon. Thanks for having me.
Good stuff there from Jake Fromm as a part of our Kroger Fresh Take here today on DawgNation Daily. All right, on a more serious note to wrap things up here today, and by the way, great from Jake Fromm. Just love that. And, it's funny when you think about Chaz Chambliss there. So your teams get a chance to host you for these pre-draft opportunities. You only get 30 of those. The teams do, and they're going to use one on Chaz Chambliss. In fact, according to Jake, Chaz has already been up there. So I think that's awesome, and I'm glad to have Jake telling that story. And we do obviously wish all these guys well as they move on to their NFL careers. Don't forget, we hadn't talked about this today, but Georgia Pro Day is tomorrow. So more of these guys will get a chance to showcase themselves on that. Also, on kind of a serious note to wrap things up today, in lieu of doing a golden shoe, I want to show you this on the screen. Many of you are aware of this. David Pollack putting this out yesterday. He says, I don't share much of my personal life on social media, but today's different. If you're the praying type, please pray and lift up my wife, Lindsay. She has brain cancer, and surgery is Wednesday at Duke. So thankful to serve a loving God that meets us in our struggles. Obviously, David's been very public in his faith for many years and inspiring in doing so. And now he's asking for prayers from us. I know that we will come together and join with him on that. In fact, you're already hearing from a lot of Georgia fans who are saying that thing, and I said that very same thing. And I do mean that sincerely, right? I mean, I do believe there's power in that, and I do, just wish and hope, and I believe it will be true, that David and Lindsay and their family will feel the support they're going to get from all of DawgNation when it comes to that. So, David and Lindsay, we are praying for you. We're expecting great news on that front, and we can't wait to celebrate with you when that takes place. So, David Pollack putting that out there yesterday. I know many of you are aware of that. That in place of a golden shoe today. We'll also give you a quick Gator hater updater just for the fun of it to say goodbye here. How about 1,585 days? That's the number that we love around here. But y'all keep David and Lindsay in your prayers, and then we'll see you back here tomorrow. DawgNation Daily, presented by ServPro. And on video, time now for the R.S. Andrews Cool Down. R.S. Andrews, when you turn to for your air conditioning, heating, plumbing, and electric needs, showing up on time, doing the work that's promised for the price that's promised. We appreciate R.S. Andrews on that. Wyatt mentioning prayers for the Pollack family. Indeed, we extend those. In trying to talk to people and keep up with people, it sounds like I think they have, reason to believe that they've got, good prognosis for all this. Obviously, a very serious thing. And yet I believe there's also, plenty of reason for hope and plenty of reason for, good outcome here. So we'll be obviously watching. We'll be watching that very, very closely. Jim Kay says there's absolute power in that prayer. We certainly believe that for sure. Brodo Baggins asking about watching the press conference today live. Yeah, typically not live. They won't let us stream it or any of the outlets, but we'll have it up for you pretty quick. It's one of the things we've gotten pretty good at over the years, getting these press conferences up quick. So it goes down at noon. I'd say by 12:30 we have it up. I would say if not sooner than that. We'll have it. We'll have it up quick. We've gotten pretty good at that. We have. Aaron Dixon also extended those prayers to Dave and his family. Frank Patterson says, "If quick test for you, if all the running backs are healthy at the start of next season, who do you have starting?" I mean, you're the running back expert. Frank, I ought to be deferring to you on that. I mean, if it's next season in 2026, I mean, you still have Frazier coming back. So he'll still be there. People really like this Chauncey Bowens right now. Dwight Phillips to me is also kind of an interesting player in that I still don't know if I think of him as sort of a traditional running back, but perhaps, that also happens for him too. Let us see what else. Richie Bales mentioned the radio. I don't think radio does spring press conferences live. I may be wrong about that, and I'm not going to try to steer you wrong if they do. Obviously, I've made use of that before for my own, consumption, but I don't know that radio does the spring press conference live. They might, but I don't know. DT mentioning, obviously, they're at Duke Medical Center, a very good place to be for sure. A lot of smart people there doing good work. Let us see what else. UJ Marine says that Eugene's about an hour and a half from the beach, but it's Oregon, and so it's raining and the water's cold. That's what's weird when you get up honestly, I probably say bad things about California all the time, but when we were there for the national championship, and obviously I've been there a few times in my life, you cannot rag on that Pacific Ocean, man. You can say what you want about California, but you can't say a bad word about that Pacific Ocean. It is gorgeous, especially when the sun's setting in the evening. Weather's really pleasant, even in January. It is a staggering thing of beauty. You just can't even believe how pretty it is. Just cannot believe how pretty it is. We spent where we were, I guess you think about the geography of LA, where where SoFi is, near Inglewood. Inglewood's kind of close to that area, kind of going over towards Santa Monica and the coast. So we spent a good bit of time around the beach when we were out there for the national championship, more so this past time than in 2017 when we were there for the Rose Bowl. It is gorgeous. I love the Pacific Ocean, but the Pacific Ocean's cold. Even down in like the southern part of California, you put your feet in the Pacific Ocean, it's way colder than it is. And I don't know why necessarily, but it's way colder, way colder. But as you start working your way up north, you think about like the coastal area of like, say, Northern California going to Oregon. They don't even swim at all in those waters because it's just, rough, choppy, and cold. Very, very different experience, but kind of cool too, though. Let us see what else. Okay. Is that right? So that's where they shot Goonies, I'm being told. That's pretty interesting. There you go. Cannon Beach, I guess it's called. Doggy says that Georgia doesn't need a GM as long as Kirby Smart is there, which obviously speaks to the respect that folks have for Kirby, and I do get that. I wonder about the future on some of this kind of stuff. And ultimately, at a place like Georgia, here's what I think an expanded role for a GM might really be. At a certain point, you need a bad cop. And I don't know how well the coach is situated to be the bad cop. The same way, like, I would say that broadly speaking for a football team, the head coach is the bad cop in terms of like, discipline, things like that. And the position coach sometimes get to be the good cop, the guy that's always nice. And this is the guy you like. The head coach, oh man, this guy's always on me. When it comes to like your money and some of that kind of stuff and what you can be paid and who's going to do what, I mean, some of these coaches might want to sort of offload some of those sort of hard decisions over to like the bad cop. It's kind of like if you ever work in a corporation and the corporation brings in the consulting firm like a McKinsey or Deloitte, some of that kind of stuff. I promise you, none of those people have any new ideas about anything. I promise you. I can assure you of that. Sometimes it's just a chance for like the sort of corporate folks you brought in. I shouldn't say that. I don't mean disrespect, whatever. But sometimes that's just a sort of chance to bring in somebody to sort of be the bad cop for you. You look around like, hey, we may have some sort of like some bloated stuff around here. We may have gotten a little top heavy. Let's bring in the consulting firm, and they'll tell people what I don't want to have to tell them. Sometimes that's the way that works. All right, let's see what else. Richard D says, have G-Day tickets gone on sale yet? So last year, they didn't mention anything about tickets until very late. It got kind of weird where people were like, what's going on with G-Day tickets? They didn't mention them until very late. My guess is the same thing might happen again. So you shouldn't have trouble getting them because I think this year the full stadium should be available. But they didn't make any kind of announcement about their availability until pretty late last year. UJ Marine mentioning Hawaii and Cali. So when we got married, we went to Maui for a honeymoon. Great experience. It's really like being somewhere. I mean, you really feel like you go to Maui, you feel like you are somewhere. Like you just really feel like you're seeing something that's unlike anything you've ever seen before. And it's one of those things where like, you have a good time on that. My wife and I were talking about, we got to go back. And you start wondering, well, can we go back in 5 years, go back, whatever. Well, here we are. We've been married for more than 20 years now. Still haven't been back. And you kind of wonder, okay, well, will we ever go back? I'd like to take my kids there at some point in time before they get married. We've sort of had a little bit of a goal that we'd like to go visit all 50 states. We're a long way from getting that done, but we'd like to get there. So we'd like to be able to do that. But honestly, like, as cool as Hawaii is, I mean, I would say that a lot of these Caribbean beaches are just as good and they're a lot easier to get to, especially on a Royal Caribbean cruise vacation. Bill Camacho says he loves the East Coast with a passion more so than the West Coast. The one thing I do like about West Coast, the one reason why I might be willing to listen to the argument that West Coast is the best coast, if you're a sports fan, like NFL Sunday or college football Sunday, college football games kick off at like 9 a.m. That's awesome. I mean, they're over in time to go to bed, which is really nice. Like, I don't think I'll ever retire, but I've said before, if I did ever retire, like retiring out west somewhere where you have, just good access to early television. Sometimes these games around here come on very late at night. I think I'd probably like that. Let me get some Facebook comments here for a minute. And because of everything that's going on today, we're not going to go super late. Let us see what else. Michael Anthony Rose asking about the accessibility for Sanford Stadium. That's a good question, Michael. I know that a lot of the accessible seating is in the west end zone area, kind of down there pretty low. And that's not the only accessible seating they have anymore, I don't believe. But I do know they have a lot of that right there in that area. We get a chance to talk to a lot of those folks kind of, prior to the game, just because that's right where we're always standing before the game. So, I see that area. I do know that obviously as the stadium renovations have been, ongoing throughout the years, that gives you a chance to also upgrade when it comes to some of that kind of stuff too. So, I know that Georgia takes that very seriously to make the stadium as accessible as it possibly can be. If there's a more specific question I can answer for you, we'll see if we can get that answer for you, even if I'm not quite sure if I know the answer. Good to see Matt Rukavina in here today. Eddie Burleson giving you a go, Dogs. Oh, so Matt Rukavina says, I love waking up to game day, BA. I feel like I've missed half the show and we're up in Alaska visiting my brother-in-law. Yeah, there you go, talking about like time frame stuff. I've never been to Alaska. Boy, I'd like to go at some point in time. Brian Whitaker says he'd like to visit all 50 states. He's been to 17 so far. So, speaking as a family, we've been, we went to Cooperstown for the baseball tournament back in the summer, and we had to drive. I think I told you that story. And so we checked off a good number doing that. So that was kind of nice. So we're probably, we don't have the majority of the states, not even close to that. But we try to find these ways to sort of tick off a few. Back in 2020, when Georgia played in Fayetteville, we drove up there to that. That gave you a chance to knock off a few states. So every now and then, we just try to find these little trips we can take that sort of knock off a few states. Just try to find our way to do that. So slowly but surely we're getting there. I mean, eventually we got to do a big one to like, and the one I'm looking forward to, because even in my own life, I've never done this. I want to go through Dakotas, into Big Sky country and see all that kind of stuff. What an experience that must be. Just so unique, so different than the other stuff that exists from a landform standpoint in America, and the kind of thing that you got to make a special point to go up there and do. I just really want to do that. So Kirk Schultz, who, by the way, lives out in the Pacific Northwest, says the Gulf Stream runs close to the eastern coast and keeps the Atlantic rather warm. Okay, that's what that is. Because I'm telling you, you put your feet in the Pacific Ocean, even the summer, you're down there around the Santa Monica Pier or something like that, or Malibu, somewhere like that. Just put your feet in the water. It just feels very different. At least to me it does. Also, some of y'all are in here ripping on the Atlantic Ocean. I'm still Atlantic Ocean until I die. That's what I grew up doing. I guess that's why. Whatever you grew up doing, you like. I know some of y'all are into the Gulf of America, but I'm an Atlantic Ocean guy forever. Oh, Michael Anthony Rose says the Indian Ocean makes the Pacific look like a muddy pond. So that's pretty cool, Michael. I don't know that I'll ever get a chance to see the Indian Ocean, but it'd be a cool thing to be able to do. That's really cool. Good for you. I'm glad you've gotten that experience. That's amazing. Was that in service? Is that how you saw it, or did you just visit there? But that's pretty amazing. Yeah, that's really cool. Yeah, the Arctic Ocean, the Indian Ocean. I'm not quite so sure that I'll ever get myself there, but it'd be kind of cool to do that. All right, let's see what else. Let me go back to YouTube for a minute. Lennox has the Kirby press conference. So happens at noon. We'll have it up for you about 12:30 or so. By the way, we may have a fun announcement. We may have a couple of fun announcements coming up. May have something kind of fun for you here, very soon as it relates to a couple of things, which I know is very vague. But I may have some announcements coming up. And one of these things is something you've been asking for. Really, both of these things are stuff you've been asking for. But one of these you've really been asking for. So we may have something for you on that. Our buddy Dennis Wilson's checking in. You always tell how he thinks Miami's doing about whether or not Dennis is checking in on the show. But I am glad to have Dennis back today. Glad to have him back. I missed you, Dennis. I missed you. Y'all need to get one of those, what do you call them? Was it protected by some of those, like the clubs or like the Viper or whatever else? You need to, y'all need to get that for your cars down there. It sounds like some of your players are having trouble with their whips. Jonathan Aaron says Josh Allen got a new contract, 6 years, $250 million. Boy, the quarterback market is just out of control right now. It's outrageous. But that's what I mean. The cap's is going up, and as a percentage of the cap, these quarterback contracts are going to go up too. Jonathan Shield checking in. Says he's been watching for years, just started commenting. Jonathan, thanks for checking in. I appreciate that. I'm glad you were here. Frank Patterson says that Jordan Davis just got a contract extension. That's awesome to be able to see. That's good to be able to see. Eagles have some interest. I mean, anytime you win the Super Bowl, you're sort of faced with this. Eagles have some interesting, cap conversations coming up. So I'm glad to see Jordan get some money out of that. That's good. Very good. Let us see what else. Taylor Russell and some of them are talking about visiting somewhere, but I honestly can't tell where it is they're visiting. But I'm glad to see people enjoying the conversation. UGA Marine says he's been on motorcycle rides, Dakotas, Wyoming, Montana, Idaho. All those places were really nice with good people. Yeah, I'd love to be able to see it. And I've wanted to see that long before, like Yellowstone's popularity and things like that, which I'm probably less of a Yellowstone fan than some people are. But let's see what else. Final comments before we get ready to go today. Justin Ham says, heading back to Bama from Tennessee, trucking, yelling, "Go Dogs." Justin, love having you out there. We appreciate our truck driver folks, because you're the one that gets the stuff where it needs to go. America's unsung heroes, I'll say it forever, are our truckers. We don't have anything if not for truckers. So I appreciate that. I've also always just loved 18-wheelers. I don't know why. I just always have. I think I could, and I don't know if I could actually drive the vehicle, but I think that I think the trucker life would be awesome. I just think it'd be great. I'd love to talk about driving through Dakota and stuff like that. Man, I'd love to do long haul stuff. I think that'd be great. I'm sure I probably romanticize the job. I mean, it's hard work, obviously, getting from place to place. I'm sure I probably overly romanticize it, but I love trucker culture. I love truck stops. I just love all of that. I love all of that. All right, let's see what else. Oh, how about this? Here's the thing that just blows my mind. Cody's not here today, but he always talks about this too. We have the most well-traveled audience. Somebody mentioned the Indian Ocean before. Then I said something about the Arctic Ocean. Our buddy Kirk Schultz, who lives in the Pacific Northwest, says that he's actually been in the Arctic Ocean for fishing. He went crabbing in the Arctic Ocean. Can you imagine the size of those things you're probably pulling out? My goodness. Boy, some crab legs sounds good right now. I'll tell you that much. Grady Darcy says 18-wheelers roll on. Love the Alabama song, too. I am here for all of that. I am here for all of that. I'm also very respectful of trucks on the highway, too. People don't really realize this, but they dart in front of all these trucks and things like that. It's like, y'all, these trucks cannot stop on a dime. That is not a Honda Civic that you're cutting in front of here right now. If you slam on your brakes in front of that truck's going to slam on its brakes. And guess what? It's got a hood cam. It's going to see what you did, and you're going to end up getting, cited for that. So, yeah. That's my sort of soapbox for the day, I guess. All right. Let's see anything else before we go. Taylor Russell mentioning Over the Top, great 1980s movie. Sylvester Stallone, truck driver, arm wrestler, great movie. For a while, you sort of wondered, and I think they tried to make arm wrestling into a thing. Some of the arm wrestlers in that movie were real arm wrestlers. As a sport, I don't know that it quite took off, but I do like that movie. Stallone turns the hat backwards. That's when he's getting ready to get serious. You had the one arm wrestler would eat a cigar and drink motor oil and things like that. Man, 80s movies. I've said this before. I'm sure everybody feels this way. 80s best time to be a child. I just feel like the culture was built for children in the 80s. We had children-themed primetime shows like A-Team and Knight Rider and Dukes of Hazzard, things like that. A lot of great movies sort of themed towards kids. And I'm sure that this is just sort of, I'm sure everybody feels that way about their era. But honestly, as somebody who's raising kids right now, I don't really feel like this culture now is built for kids. I really don't. But boy, it sure did feel that way when I was a kid, which is great. A lot of great movies like that. Foster Moss, speaking of trucking movies, Smokey and the Bandit. Anytime I ever see a Coors, not to give, free plugs away, but a Coors truck or something like that, I always think that. Jack Fullerton, yeah, the character, I think this was, so the arm wrestler was real, and he had sort of a gimmick where he would take the cigar and chew it up and swallow it and drink motor oil. I'm telling the truth about that. So now whether it was actual motor oil, I'm guessing it probably wasn't. That'd probably kill you. But that was part of his shtick. Caleb Myers checking in. He says, we'll finish with this today. He said, we had a baby girl 3 weeks ago. She's happy and healthy. Mama's doing great too. Thank you for your prayers. Caleb, absolutely what a celebration that is. Such great news. Great Georgia fan. Great growing family here. Man, we love that. We're always here for you in the tough times. We love celebrating those good times. These families growing and getting bigger. No better reason to celebrate than that. So, Caleb, congratulations on that. And hopefully these dogs give you a good story or two to follow during spring practice as you try to get whatever little bit of sleep you can. So that's awesome stuff. Hey, y'all check out RS Andrews online, rsandrews.com. Air conditioning, heating, plumbing, and electric needs. They show up on time. They do the work that's promised, the price is promised. You can trust RS Andrews today. We got warm weather coming. That means your air conditioning unit better be ready for it. So find them online, rsandrews.com, for all on that. They'll get you tuned up. They'll get your old unit feeling like it's got new life in it. That's a great thing. Save you money in the long run, too. So online, rsandrews.com. Back tomorrow, DawgNation Daily, presented by ServPro. We will look forward to talking to you then.